Hi, this is Barry. This is the Simplicity Zen podcast. Today we have Renshin Bunce. Hi, Renshin. How are you doing?
Hey Barry, I'm good. How about you?
Good, thank you. Could you tell us, Shin means mind, right? So could you tell us what Renshin means?
Well, we always say heart mind and make that gesture. So Renshin, my teacher, Myogen Steve Stücky, the late, great, beloved, now what we call dead, Myogen Steve Stücky, when I made jukai with Steve in 96, he gave me the name of Renshin Ji Ko.
Hmm.
So Renshin, Ren is lotus,
Hmm.
so lotus heart mind, and the Jiko is boundless compassion.
Great.
So I thought I liked being a lotus. I was, for most of my life, pretty. Yeah, lotuses are pretty. He gets it. And years later, we were doing the meal chant in the Zendo, and I get it. We like lotuses because you can't grow a lotus in pure water.
Hmm.
It takes muddy water.
Hmm.
And Steve knew, and I know, my life has had plenty of muddy water. So it's lotus heart mind, boundless compassion. And when I ordained as a priest, I was living at Tassajara, and I asked people to start calling me by my Dharma name. And so I was so ingrained as Ren that when at transmission, Steve flipped my names and he made the Jiko my first name, and Renshin is my second, my realized name.
I see.
And I'm lucky because I use it out in the world, and I can just say my name is Ren,
Hmm.
and it's not a big deal,
Hmm.
unlike some other Dharma names.
Right. Mine's Gambo. Sounds
Yeah,
like,
see?
yeah.
Yeah, I have a dear friend who's been at Green Gulch for a long time. You might know about him, Jiryu.
Hmm.
And I think that, because as I think you know, I'm recently retired and I was working as a hospice chaplain for 12 years.
Hmm.
So I'd say to the old ladies who were hard of hearing and whatnot, my name is Ren. And I think, what if I was having to say my name is Jiryu? The old ladies would say, is that WREN? And I'd say, I'm so poor I couldn't afford the W. It's RE, right?
Right.
And then we were laughing. So,
Yeah, yeah. Dharma names are such an interesting thing. I mean, teachers really seem to nail it. Gambo means aspiration, and I definitely. But for me, I think it was more of a warning than than what.
do you also get two names?
No, we don't, which is
Uh-huh.
unusual. I guess
Uh-huh.
unusual. It's mainstream setup.
Yeah.
And so you're a retired
Yeah.
um,
Woohoo.
chaplain. Yeah.
Yeah.
How long ago did you retire?
January 29th.
Wow, congratulations.
Yeah, it's been a very active little time here. Yeah.
And you had your sitting group, right, in the Bay Area?
Yeah, I've had a sitting group for a really long time. I think it's 6 years. I tried several times, and the final time I found a place to sit, a chapel in an Episcopal church, and I put it on Meetup, and this group of people showed up, and they have kept showing up.
Mhm.
Fabulous, fabulous.
Mhm.
When COVID arrived, maybe because I was working in healthcare, also because I was watching Rachel Maddow at the time,
Mhm.
I really thought I knew what was coming. And so I remember saying to the group, we can't sit in person, but we can sit on Zoom.
Mhm.
And after that first night, I enjoyed it so much. I was so, you remember that time, how difficult it was. So I said, and this is the story of my life, without thinking of the consequences, I said, let's do it every night. So I think we were up to 440 nights when I cut back, and it got me through the worst of the pandemic, and I know it helped others too. So now we sit 3 nights a week, and what a blessing Zoom is, because
So what's
I've moved to a part of the country where I really don't know anyone. I have just climbed up the 50-foot pole and jumped,
Mhm.
and that I have that continuity and that connection still is everything.
What's the name of the Sangha?
Beginner's mind,
Beginner's
Zen
Mind.
meditation, yeah.
So,
And I'll start a group here,
mhm.
but I don't know, in a few weeks maybe,
Yeah,
when I figure out where I am.
yeah. So, where did you grow up?
I was born in Marin County,
Mhm.
and my parents were divorced when I was a little baby.
Mhm.
So here comes that story. Um, After the divorce, my mother took my older sister and me to Pasadena, and that's where I was raised.
Mhm.
So I can make that sound like a childhood of privilege. I was born in Sausalito and raised in Pasadena.
Right. But your mom, I mean, your mother left because it was a dramatic situation. So, that,
Because there was violence. Both of my parents were alcoholics.
mhm.
So, and at the earliest opportunity, I developed my own alcoholism.
Mhm.
I I recently had that reminder, that understanding, that story I choose to believe, that I chose this family to be born into,
Mhm.
and that I chose the difficulty of alcoholism because I wanted a turbo boost into the spiritual life.
Mhm.
I wanted to experience suffering right from the start to such a degree that I would be driven to find you.
Mhm.
I
Did
like that story.
so as a child, were you religious at all? Did you guys go to church?
Well, for bonus points, the Christian Science Church.
Oh, interesting.
I know, it's a trip.
Yeah.
And as an adult, when I meet other people who were raised Christian Science, there's always something to be said about that.
So my very not very sophisticated understanding of Christian Science is that it basically the extent of my knowledge about it is that they don't believe in going to the doctor if you're sick. Is that correct?
Oh, I could say more.
Mhm.
I like to say deny physical reality.
Mhm.
And I
Is
was I was punished when I was a child if I let the side down and was injured. Uh, you were supposed to. So, as I understand it, you're God's perfect child. God doesn't skin her knee, so you didn't skin your knee.
you
This
can't
is
make mistakes.
this is really quite an ask for a child. When my mom left my dad, her parents lived with us, and her mother was the staunch Christian Scientist. And I think it was part of the deal that's why I was sent to Christian Science Sunday school. As soon as I was given freedom of choice, I shot off to the Catholic Church with my pals, with
Mhm.
people in robes and incense and chanting in a language I didn't understand. So I had that taste early
Right.
on.
A little bit of preview of what
Whee!
was that more as a kid or more as a teenager?
My memory is I was in 8th grade. I was in middle school, and the mass was still in Latin.
And it spoke to you, like just the the feeling of being there.
I don't know. I liked it.
Mhm.
I
Were you a
liked it.
believer? Did you believe in God or Jesus or?
Probably.
Mhm.
Sure, it was in the air. Southern California in the 50s.
Mhm.
Norman Rockwell. Sure.
So did you grow up in time to experience the 60s as a teenager or a young adult?
I graduated from, see, I consider myself to be a lucky person. I graduated from San Francisco State in 1964. I was there. I was there, man.
Uh-huh.
I had a boyfriend who I met in the modern French literature class.
Mhm.
We were on his motorcycle at a red light, and a guy pulled up next to us on his motorcycle, and he was my boyfriend's marijuana dealer.
Mhm.
And he said to my boyfriend, I have a friend who works in a hospital. He just found a big jar of something called LSD and he stole it. Do you want to buy some? So it was like that. It was pretty
Wow.
good.
Yeah. Would you hang out at Haight-Ashbury and go to the music scene and stuff like that?
I danced at the original Fillmore for sure.
Mm,
And the really good thing that happened was I hooked up with the art school crowd.
mm,
So a whole bunch of us moved to New York at the same time, which I think was 65, and I stayed in New York for 5 years.
mm.
So the big flowering, the love-ins and all of that, I was back in New York for that.
Was there a
Waiting tables at Max's Kansas City and living in the Chelsea Hotel and trying to be happy.
yeah. What was there a hippie scene or was it more
Oh
beatnik?
yeah. Oh, I don't know.
Yeah.
It was us. I really think I was very fortunate to always be around the artists, the creatives. I place a high value on creativity. So that's the part of New York I was in.
So the psychedelics, do you think those had any influence in your
Or
future
what?
endeavors?
Yes.
Yeah.
God. A glimpse of something else,
Hmm.
of another possibility.
Hmm.
Yes.
Was that something you would do just going about on town, or was it in conjunction with the music concerts in the Fillmore, all the above?
The real psychedelics, LSD, it was recreational.
Hmm.
We mostly stayed in. I remember we would drop acid to go see 2001, to go to movies. I don't remember about music,
Hmm.
but it
Yeah.
was the way it is now, the understanding of plant medicine now. This is very, very different. It was for fun, it was recreational. But I'll say again, it for coming into life, being raised the way I was. My mom never remarried. Most of my memories, I'll say that my older sister was somewhat disturbed,
Hmm.
and I bore the brunt of that at times. And the memory of just that silence and that difficulty and that yearning for love
Hmm.
and not being able to get it. The 12 by 12 Alcoholics Anonymous has a phrase in it that's important to me. It says, the astonishing fact that we alcoholics didn't realize is that we were incapable of loving another human being,
Hmm.
right? Alcoholism just consumes you. So that's how I was raised. My poor single working mom doing her best, 9 bows to mom.
Hmm.
And then I came into the world with all of that fear. How am I going to be happy? It's probably going to be a man. I'd better act attractive, on and on like that. So to to get some chemical relief from that state of mind, to get an idea that what you are seeing in this moment is far from being the whole story. And
Hmm.
that sticks with you.
Yeah. Were there hard drugs in the scene, or is it mostly
There
drinking?
were, there were, yeah, there were very
Did,
hard drugs.
did you get mixed up into opiates or cocaine or anything like that?
Oh, yes, very much.
Hmm.
Very much. It as the years in New York went on, yeah, much too much drugs. So I came back to San Francisco just like, oh, thank God, after about 5 years. And then I
Yeah.
think it kind of settled into drinking. Then I met the right guy and we were very fancy and fabulous. And that's a good part of the story because finally I had all the things that we know you have to have if you want to be happy. I finally did it.
Hmm.
And I wasn't happy.
Is this the wine importer?
As the wine importer and
Right.
going to France every year and going to Chez Panisse for dinner 2 or 3 times a week. And so that that suffering, that why, and and certainly for the tendency is, well, a great thing that I saw in my work as a chaplain that we know about, but I saw it demonstrated so many times, is the way that we look for someone to blame.
Mm-hmm.
So I was so busy blaming him and blaming myself that I couldn't see my own life.
Were you
So,
working? Sorry, go ahead, please.
yeah. And scrambling for work. So I left him. I was, in fact, at the time working for Francis Coppola. And I left him, and I got fired from the Coppola job not long after because my drinking was completely out of control. And then my life was so terrifying that I got sober. So, oh boy. So I was 35 years old, had nothing, and had my chemical relief taken out of my life. So things are starting to look up. Before I got sober, I used to go to Zen Center. I'd go to 300 page, not to meditate, but for the lecture, because I thought maybe there was information here that would help me.
So you had heard about Zen, you knew it existed.
Couldn't miss it in the running around with artists in San Francisco. Very early on, my neighbor, we lived across the street from the original Zen Center on Bush Street. And my neighbor told me, that place over there, I go there, that's called Zen Center. And he said, there's this guy who's come from Japan, and he teaches Zen, and you could go over there. His name's Suzuki. You could do. So
You missed it.
I said to my neighbor, what is Zen? And he said, it's a way to end desire. What a tragedy. If he'd known what he was talking about, I could have met Suzuki, because I was 21 years old and I was just getting started on desire. So I didn't cross the street and I didn't meet Suzuki Roshi.
Was Richard Baker the primary teacher when you would go to Page Street?
Richard Baker was there when I started going there. And a memory, thinking about talking to you, I had this memory. I mean, I would go in and just so desperate, I didn't even know how to say how desperate I was. And I'll say through all of these difficult years, I was reaching out to different therapists and, well, let's say, being patched together long enough to keep me to getting sober, given various drugs. I went to a clinic shrink in New York and they put me on Stelazine. I mean, that really was not helpful to make me numb. So
isn't that an antipsychotic, actually?
it's the cousin of Thorazine.
Yeah.
You know, I'm talking to this woman and I finally tell her how I'm really feeling. She's like, wait there. So I would go in hungover, miserable, desperate, to hear the lecture on the Saturday morning program at 300 Page. And I remember seeing a woman sitting in the Buddha hall. She was wearing a black robe. She had short brown hair. She was sitting waiting for the talk. She was so something. And I just thought, what do you know that you can be like that?
It was just her embodied presence.
That's it. Way beyond words.
Do you know who that is in retrospect?
I found out later that's Pat Phelan. Yeah, as a matter of fact. So Richard Baker was around. I had lunch with Richard Baker, and I don't remember being aware of the whole debacle. I got my first, yes, I was so desperate. I got my first copy of Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. Maybe the answer is here. All he talked about was Zazen. That's not what I need.
You know, Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind is often recommended as a beginner's book, but I think it's actually, I mean, it's pretty sophisticated.
The graduate course.
Right. It's all about emptiness, you know, that's.
And he is just so tricky. What I do in my sitting group is, in the study group once a week, is we sit for half an hour and then we read one of the talks from Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind together. So it's really a great way to work with that book.
What,
So here's this whole sad story, this ancient history, this woman who I look back on, and you know what's useful about that story, Barry, is I'm talking about millions, billions of people in this suffering of knowing something's wrong and we need help and not knowing how to find it.
mm-hmm.
So in that way, keeping that memory fresh is useful for me. Is that person me? I don't know. I don't know. Is so this story, I mean, we can fast forward, I get sober, I become very Christian. I'm
Mm-hmm.
standing up in AA meetings and telling everybody that Jesus is my sponsor.
Sorry to interject. What brought about the sobriety? Did you hit bottom? Was there one event that you like, I just
I
can't do
very,
this?
very much hit bottom, very, very close to death.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah.
We drunk 24/7 pretty much.
Oh, I don't even think that I mean, yes, I was drinking in the morning, but it's not the details, it's the state of mind.
Mm-hmm.
So I was so bad that I went to a City of San Francisco mental health clinic because I thought I was having a nervous breakdown. And they actually got me in there really fast, which is what's amazing. And
You went sober there.
it was the guy there who said, you know, it may be suggested that you consider AA. And I went to my first meeting the next night, just really relieved. My father got sober after my mother left. So there's a history of knowing that recovery is, to the extent that I can say Daddy recovered, but that there's a way of stopping drinking and that AA is that way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Did you have withdrawals? Was there a physical component
I
to it?
don't think we need to do those details
Okay.
with the time that we have together today. I think there's a lot more interesting stuff.
Okay. Fair.
I was just a terrible, very low bottom, homeless alcoholic. I was, yeah.
What was the transition of that to practicing Zen?
There we go. So I did AA, I did Christianity until the wheels fell off. And at around 9 years sober, I just, again, I need something else. And it was that feeling of if I don't get some relief from this suffering, I'm going to have to drink.
Mm-hmm.
So the only thing I hadn't done that AA tells you to do is meditate. It's in the steps, it's in the 11th step.
Mm-hmm.
So yay, here comes the good part of the story. So I reached out to the Buddhists and I had tried to meditate, but with a mind like mine, you wouldn't do it either. So I reached out to James Baraz, who's one of the Vipassana teachers, and the Vipassanas have a terrific 6-week course in how to meditate.
Mm-hmm.
Meditation was terrible for me, but what happened was I began to hear the Buddha's teachings. So for many years, I would sit still with my eyes closed, think about myself, call that meditation to pay the price for hearing the teachings.
Mm-hmm.
And somewhere in there, I don't know, now it's, oh boy, it's time to meditate. I don't know when that change took. I stayed in Vipassana for years, and golden years. This is the late 80s. And so the retreats I'd do, Sharon Salzberg and Joseph Goldstein would come out here and do 10-day retreats with Jack Kornfield.
Mm-hmm.
My therapist, because when I began to meditate and be with my mind, I certainly had to start therapy again. My therapist was Sylvia Borstein.
Really?
So
Wow.
again, I'm right for several years. As I say, I'm a very lucky person.
Mm-hmm.
So, and to be finally on one of those retreats, Joseph Goldstein was going through the instructions. And I'm going to, excuse me for bragging, but I actually began to meditate.
Mm-hmm.
Not just think about myself. And I had a lot of physical manifestations too that were really fun and kept me coming back. I still was going to Green Gulch for workshops. I don't know if I was going to City Center then. I was at a workshop at Green Gulch and I heard about a teacher in Mill Valley named Steve Stucky. Mm-hmm. I always kept myself in a sitting group. I never was good at sitting at home alone. So I had to be in a sitting group. So I would at least sit once a week.
Was the practice body scans? Was that your primary practice at that point?
Gosh, the earliest long retreat I did was 3 days with Ruth Dennison down in the desert by Joshua Tree, and all Ruth did was body scans. She would spend an hour on the tongue and the teeth.
Wow.
So I remember body scans. Mm-hmm. So when I was looking for a new sitting group, I don't remember what had been so disappointing about the one I'd been in that I stopped going to it. And I heard about this Steve Stucky. Mm-hmm. And I went to his house in Mill Valley with a friend. And isn't it just when you find your teacher? And I think it's kind of rare. I really do. And I know, as I call myself a lucky person, to have met Steve was the greatest luck. So the story goes forward, and I was on a Dzogchen retreat, a 1-month Dzogchen retreat in upstate New York, and I was walking at night, and I thought of Steve, and I thought, oh no, I'm a Zen student. The black robes, the shaved heads, the silence, Dzogchen, there's stuff all over and you're throwing your arms up in the air. But nope, nope.
Would it be safe to say you were drawn to Steve more than you're drawn to Zen, or was it a combination of the both?
Let's call Steve the portal. Mm-hmm. Long time after that, Steve told this great story. He and Richard Baker and maybe someone else were returning the peacocks from Green Gulch to, was his name Alan Chadwick? I think so. Mm-hmm. Chadwick had put the peacocks at Green Gulch. The peacocks weren't working, so they all got in a Volkswagen and drove them. So they had a couple
of Crooked Cucumber and.
No, that's David Chadwick.
Oh, David Chadwick.
Very different person. Oh. This was the anyway. So they're leaving that event, and Steve turns to Richard Baker and he says, "Why Zen? Why Zen?" Mm-hmm. And Richard Baker says, "Because it produced Suzuki Roshi." So coming from that story, I can say Zen produced Steve Stucky. And the old saying in AA is, if you find the people who have what you want, and then you do what they did. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's the best way to do it. I think choosing a tradition and then finding a teacher is a little bit backwards. I think you need to be inspired with something. Maybe there's no right way to do it, but it seems
there are as many right ways as there are people. I think that we each have a karmic resonance with a particular style, and Zen is mine. Mm-hmm.
And did you?
Because I'm a lucky person.
When you started studying with Steve, did you ramp up your practice? Did you start going to sesshin? Did you do any residential practice?
I was, I think, already doing sesshin. I don't know how long we kept meeting in the living room in Mill Valley before Steve and his wife Lane bought a little house in San Rafael. Mm-hmm. And we remodeled the 2-car garage in the backyard into a zendo. Mm-hmm. And things really changed. We were in silence, we were sitting facing the wall, we were bowing. And an interesting thing that happened was most of the people who had been regularly coming to the sitting group left. They didn't like this ritual. And about an equal number of people we'd never met before appeared.
Interesting.
Yeah, so there's something about trust there. And maybe we don't have to do a lot of promotion or whatever. So because I had experience sitting sesshin at Green Gulch, I sort of moved to the front of the class. This is my story anyway. And I was able to be Steve's right-hand person, to be a doan, to be a kokyo. And it was really fun. And we would do 3-day sesshins in the 2-car garage. And I continued doing, I really liked long sitting right from the start. I liked that silence and that concentration.
Did you have physical difficulties with your legs or backs? Or?
Oh, terrible. Terrible. I don't know how many years it was before my body gave up the fight. And I had to train it to sit cross-legged and all that. Terrible.
Did you take jukai at this period of your life?
Yeah, in the garage. I was in the first jukai group. There were 3 of us, and that was in 96.
Did the precepts resonate with you, or was it more
No.
the commitment to the path?
No, I kind of did it because I wanted the wardrobe. Mm-hmm. I thought, well, if you're the one who's standing next to the teacher holding the incense, you should have a rakusu. Mm-hmm. That was as deep as I was capable of going. And after jukai, realizing what I had done was really shocking. Mm-hmm. But you can't undo it.
Right. Do you feel like it changed your practice, the deeper commitment? For better or worse?
Can you rephrase that question?
Did your relationship to Buddhism or practice change? Did you feel more committed? Did it scare you off a little bit?
I stayed very committed. Mm-hmm. I stayed very committed. Mm-hmm. So my view on vow, I lived at Tassajara for quite a while. Mm-hmm. During the summer at Tassajara, we'd put a sign up on the office, it says full moon ceremony tonight. Mm-hmm. So all of these, and the people who come to Tassajara is so expensive. I mean, do you know that during the summer? It's my God. Mm-hmm. So these well-to-do people who were spiritually curious, those were the summer guests, they'd come up to the Zendo for the full moon ceremony. And what did they get? 87 bows and vows. And I just like to think of all those people who actually, they took their vows. And how's that going? Yeah. Because I'm one of the people who, after I priest ordained with Blanche Hartman. Steve was the 3rd preceptor. It was Linda Ruth. It was her first Tokudo, and Blanche and Steve, and it was Tova Green and me. Mm-hmm. And by this time I'm living at City, and it was difficult. Mm-hmm. In that period, what I came to understand and what I live by today is, please don't think you took a vow. Mm-hmm. And what happens, and to varying degrees, waves are of varying heights. The vow took me. Mm-hmm. And with priest ordination, it took me big. And with transmission, it drowned me. Mm-hmm. So I was in my little black dress in the 2-car garage in 96, saying yes to a bunch of questions. What happened? I don't know.
So how did you switch to living at City Center? Was it just a natural, organic progression? Was there
Barry, I love all these stories so much. So I went to Steve. I said, this is really interesting. And at this time, what am I doing for a living? I'm selling real estate. Good God. So I go to Steve. I say, practice. This is wonderful. What do I have to do? Give up everything and move to Tassajara? And I had actually gotten if you call San Francisco Zen Center and you say, I think I'd like to be a monk at Tassajara, in those days anyway, they send you pieces of paper. And when I saw the schedule, when I saw that the wake-up bell is at 3:45, I'm like, I'm never going to do that. So that's what I said to Steve. And Steve said, you know, you could try a non-residential practice period at City Center. So that's what I did. And that really got me hooked into San Francisco Zen Center. It's when I met Blanche. And
was she running the practice period?
I don't remember. This is back in '99.
Was Blanche the abbot at that point?
She sure was, man. She sure was.
She was
what
impressive.
A force of nature, Blanche Hartman. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Blanche was the sewing teacher, and Blanche made me into a sewing teacher. Once we were having dinner in the dining room and there was some person visiting. Blanche was having dinner with him and I was sitting there. And Blanche said to this person, what I really want to do is just clone myself so the sewing practice can go forward. And she gestured toward me. So she kind of did. She made me into, she taught me how to be a sewing teacher. It was a great gift. It's a great practice. Yeah.
And eventually you just got sucked into it and decided to move there?
Well, yeah, not long after. I don't know how long it was after I started at City Center, and I was very well received. I was a dowan and I was a head server. And
this is prior to residential.
For sure. I had lay robes and my little blue rakusu. And not long after that, I did my first practice period at Tassajara with Blanche, which was very hard, to say the least. And I came back from that determined to return to Tassajara full time, which I did.
How did the transition from Steve being your teacher to Blanche happen? Is it just because she was proximity? You were there living with her, so it made sense?
I could say that.
Yeah.
Blanche really wanted me. Teachers want students. And I think particularly because of the sewing connection. She was very happy when I arrived.
Was this rough for Steve, do you think?
Hard to say. I think I ghosted him and I didn't even know it. So when Blanche and I were breaking up, Steve was right there. And there was never, here's a story I love about Steve. I was his first Tassajara shuso. So much fun. When you do that, you're in this little cabin, and here's the abbot's cabin, and there's this gravel walkway. Have you been to Tassajara? I'm sure, Barry. So you know there's no sneaking around because you're always walking on that pea gravel, crunch, crunch, crunch. So I'm in the shuso cabin, whatever, and I hear footsteps going back to the abbot's cabin, and I look, and it's the woman who was the problem person in the practice period. She was always kicking up a fuss about something. She was always pulling all the energy to herself. She had become so disillusioned with us that she had left. And you don't leave Tassajara. She had left. And there she was coming back. And I thought, oh boy, she's going to get it. So she knocks on the cabin door, and I could see Steve opens the cabin door and he's surprised, and then he just smiled and he opened the door wide. He said, "Come in." So that was Steve. I said a few words at the ceremony at his cremation, and what I said was, he forgave me before he even met me. So this is the quality that it was actually 20 years with that Zen teacher was a 20-year-long experience of unconditional love, which is, I know it, pretty unusual. And that's what Zen created.
Who was Steve's teacher? Who transmitted?
Mel.
Mel. Okay.
Mel man, the great Mel. Yes.
Did
Yes.
you do practice periods with him as well?
Oh yeah, I did everything I could with Mel. I mean, what a great Mel and Reb, Mel and Reb.
Hmm.
Phew. You know, giants,
It's interesting.
giants,
I
giants
did,
who walk among us.
I've done both of their retreats. I never got to know either, but they really seem like yin yangs to each other in a lot of ways. Reb with the
I,
incredible intensity, and Mel with the love,
Mis-
the lovingness.
Mr. Chill.
Yeah.
I know. It would have been interesting to have known who they were when they were co-abbots. So here's another great story. An early Tassajara practice period, Mel and Reb are there. I wasn't there. This is one of the stories I heard. Mel and Reb are there. They have to leave for some important meeting. It's been snowing, and there's only one pair of snowshoes. I guess they didn't have cars.
Right.
So they had a little competition. I don't know. One of them walked out wearing snowshoes, and they walked out side by side, and the other one walked out wearing a pair of flattened number 10 tin cans.
Ah,
See, I think that's when Zen Center was Zen Center,
mhm,
when it was just so funky and seat of the pants,
mhm.
and and the solutions were worked out. Love that story. Flattened number 10 tin cans.
Who were your buddies at Tassajara? Were there any people that stand out? I mean, I know you don't live anywhere out, but yeah,
It's so long ago.
yeah.
So what I want to say about that is I think that I moved into Zen Center looking for family.
Mhm,
I saw a solution to loneliness.
mhm,
And I had an idea of in India, you do your regular life. And
mhm,
then when you're older, you turn to spirituality. That sounded pretty good.
mhm,
I moved in thinking that I would be taken care of,
mhm,
wanting to be taken care of, wanting family, the lonely little child of divorce finally.
mhm,
And Zen Center is not like that at all. It is not like that at all. I'm one of many who had a very lonely experience at Tassajara.
mhm.
I mean, really, if you want to get in touch with your deep, difficult feelings, do
Yeah.
another practice period at Tassajara. Now I'm going to tell you, I got what I needed. I am a part of a vast family.
Mhm,
We are not just, I mean, we're all over the planet.
mhm,
And these are, so I'm, emailing, Zooming. When we see each other, it's as if no time has passed.
mhm.
And those are probably mostly doing a practice period together. You really get to know each other. At the end of the first practice period, during the meals, and I assume anyone watching this knows meals are part of the ritual. You're seated on your cushion. It's like, are they ever going to serve the food because the oatmeal is getting cold and I'm so hungry? And then you finally get to eat. So I'm sitting there with my eyes closed, and a server walked by, and I knew who it was. And I thought, wow, so intimacy, it's an experience of intimacy.
In your book, Entering the Monastery, you talked a lot of interesting stories about challenging interpersonal relations with other students. Could you talk about how that was part of your practice at that time?
We could almost say that was my practice, Barry, although I didn't know it.
Hmm.
Um, I haven't read that book for a long time. I wrote that book, I'm on the Well. You might have heard of the Well,
Right.
probably the earliest, what's now called social media. So I wrote that as a topic on the Well just because I love writing and people were interested. That first practice period, I had a notebook computer and I would write up a description, and then I'd put it on a floppy disk and I'd mail the floppy disk out.
Hmm.
And my friend would post it online. So, so the way that we think Zen, oh, it's going to be peaceful. Monastery, oh, it's going to be loving, and we're just on each other's last nerve.
Yeah.
You don't get enough sleep, you don't get enough to eat,
Mhm.
and people are really irritating. So
Mhm.
you get to see, you really, it's finally time to see who's causing your suffering.
Mhm.
And spoiler alert, it is not them.
Mhm.
And you finally, there's a story. So I'm walking down to the bathhouse. I never could get the great jobs. So one summer I'm the bathhouse attendant. Jesus, don't they know who I am? I'm the bathhouse attendant. So I'm walking down to the bathhouse and they're all stupid. They're just, I mean, all of them, my peers, the people running the place, they're terrible. And the thought appeared, you said you wanted to be in a monastery.
Mhm.
This is a monastery.
Mhm.
And the saving thought, there's not a better monastery over there.
Mhm.
You're in a monastery, so get with it. That understanding has applied to many, many circumstances in my life.
Mhm.
So I'm still very close friends with people who I did practice periods with. And at the time, I can't say I was very close with practically anybody.
Were you year round at Tassajara? Would you stay there through the summer period and then the
Yeah,
July
yeah.
goes, or would you go back and forth to Green Gulch and City Center?
No, you stay there because you work through the summer to earn the practice periods. So yeah, I did 8 ongos and 2 summers.
Mhm.
The summers, I mean, this is why I didn't move to the Sierra foothills. It would get up to 110 and stay there for days.
Right.
It was really, and I don't do well in heat. So I moved from there to City Center. I was at Tassajara straight through for 3 years, and then I was at City Center for 4 years.
Did you get ordained while you're still at Tassajara or once you
Yeah,
came to City Center?
yeah, that was really fun.
Mhm.
Got ordained at City Center and came back down to Tassajara with this new okesa and this new shaved head. That
Mhm.
was great.
Yeah. And then you lived at City Center for a while.
Yeah,
And is there anything worth relating from that period of time?
living hell. One of the most surprising things that's ever happened is my teacher, Steve Stucky, becoming abbot of San Francisco Zen Center. Never saw that coming. He was never around. No one knew who he was, but he'd always been on the Council of Elders.
Mhm.
So I was working in the front office, and it was Mel who came in, and we knew they'd been meeting.
Mhm.
And we were making jokes about the puff of smoke coming up from the
It's
Pope's
conclave.
chimney.
Right.
And Mel came in the office and we were all kind of kidding around. And Mel did that thing. He came over to my desk and he leaned down. He put his face, he said, "Do you want to know who it is? Do you want to know who it is?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Steve Stucky." And I screamed.
Mhm.
So it was fantastic. So I don't know what to say about my difficulties at Zen Center. I'm going to say the primary difficulty was my story, my expectation
Mhm.
that I would be welcome,
Mhm.
that I would work my way up some ladder and become important, and that I'd be able to stay there.
Mhm.
I was operating on that assumption. The
Yeah.
institution was not. The
Yeah.
institution was not. So
Can,
then we get to the happy part where, so God, I got to do something. So this is why I trained as a chaplain. Because by that time I pretty much understood that the vow was the most important thing. And
were you told explicitly that you couldn't stay at City Center in that ceremony?
That's pretty much the problem. It was a kind of a being passed over and given the cold shoulder.
Hmm.
I think that it might not be like that anymore. But you know, Barry, it's not an unusual story to have been hurt by an institution. Another very important understanding. I went in thinking that the purpose of San Francisco Zen Center in accepting me as a resident was to help me grow spiritually. I thought that's what the institution was there for. That is a big mistake.
Hmm.
When I understood that what the institution's primary purpose is to take care of the institution to stay in business, that's a very different story.
Hmm.
When I understood the next time me, as I described myself, drinking and staggering in there with a hangover on a Saturday morning looking for help,
Hmm.
that the purpose of the institution is so that suffering person has a place to come where she can learn Zazen, where she can hear the Dharma. That's a very different story. And if that's the purpose of San Francisco Zen Center, they're doing a very good job. I became involved with Everyday Zen, Norman Fisher's group,
Hmm.
which is frankly sort of, there's a whole bunch of people who've been hurt by San Francisco Zen Center who go to Norman. And Norman's got the biggest tent. He's like, come on in, come on in. It's a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful group. Very healing. Yeah.
So were you still there when Steve came to become abbot?
We just briefly,
Hmm.
just yes, yep. I was part of his mountain seat ceremony.
Hmm.
And when Steve arrived, I could have said, I could have asked him to fix it so I could stay and be allowed to claw my way up the ladder and be seen for how fabulous I am. But I was already on the path to becoming a chaplain, and I continued with that path. And Steve was really happy that I did that.
Had you become a student again, like
Yes,
functionally? Yeah,
yes. Blanche finally fired me.
really.
And Steve was on his way in. So I'm like, I think this is going to be fine. And so I was able to go back to him and formally ask him to reinstate me as a student. And he was glad to do so. And it was yep. It was the year after that I was his Tassajara shuso. And then it was 5 years after that we went through transmission at Tassajara, and that was the year that he died, but we didn't know he was sick. So
Was
I
Steve?
was his first and only at Tassajara.
I apologize if this is a dumb question. Was Steve the one who had that incredible blog that kind of detailed his process of getting cancer and dying? Is that him I'm thinking about?
I do not remember. He had pancreatic cancer,
Yeah.
and he he's known for. He was scheduled to give the Wednesday talk at Green Gulch.
Mhm.
Between the scheduling and the talk, he learned that he had terminal cancer.
Mhm.
He showed up for the talk, and that's known as the gratitude talk. And that is a great, great, great Zen teacher expressing his understanding of his situation.
When Steve started talking to you about transmission, did that come as a surprise?
Another good story, Barry, because what I saw was for a while there, how does this go? I'm living at City Center. I'm having trouble with Blanche. I'm connected back with Steve's group. I'm doing sesshin with them. I'm having dokusan with him.
Mhm.
And what I saw was I was trying to look more, I was trying to look less mentally ill than I felt. I was trying to look mentally well so that he would give me transmission. And when I realized that was what I was doing,
Mhm.
I told him, this is how it was with us. And I said, we have to take transmission off the table because this is not going to work. So that stayed for a few years, and then I don't remember, but yeah, he asked, and of course, and by that time, I'd been out of the building for several years by that time.
As a working chaplain?
Yeah, finally, yeah. So I shaved my head and went back and did the preliminaries at home in my apartment alone, and it was magnificent. I got it. Any difficulty, any suffering, hurt feelings, broken hearts, totally worth it. That transmission at Tassajara, trust has always been a big issue in my life, and I could trust Steve Stucky, and God, we had so much fun. And the final night of it was just, we were both just laughing because we were having like, oh my God, here comes more presents. Oh my God, more bows. It was great. It was just, yeah. And that doesn't stop. You know, Steve's death has been, when he died, I'd already been a hospice chaplain for some years. And another part of the story is I helped my mother die in 1990, and my mother died very badly. She died screaming. Mm-hmm. So it occurred to me that my mother had that bad death because she was so afraid of death and she'd never looked at it. Mm-hmm. So because I had had exposure to the teachings by that time, I thought, well, maybe I should be friendly with death because it's going to come for me too. Mm-hmm. So most of the work for chaplains is in hospice, and yeah, I'll do that. So I'd been around death.
You did the AIDS, like a volunteer AIDS chaplain, is that correct?
At the Buddhist chaplaincy training out of Redwood City, you have to do volunteer hours, and I did those on the AIDS ward at Laguna Honda. So when Steve died, I was familiar with death, but there's never been a teaching like that. I told him in the year after his death, you know, you didn't have to go to this much trouble to teach me about grief. The grief was, don't you think, Barry, the only way we really learn anything is by living it? We can read about it in a book, mm-hmm. and that's good. I heard Reb say once, you know, the teachings, they're signposts. So when you're going along the path and you pass that place, you're better able to recognize it. Mm-hmm. So when I was also wanting to die from grief, that's okay. So this is what grief is. Now, this is interesting. And so I was able to work with people who were experiencing grief so severe that they wanted to die. I knew what that was. But yeah, and then we have the opportunity to know about the question, well, what is death? We have the opportunity to walk up and slap the coffin and scream, alive or dead, right? How dead is he?
So, can you talk a little bit about your CPE training? Was that a drastic shock?
Yeah.
It sounds like they just kind of throw you in, right?
Oh, they do. But yeah. Again, I mean, nobody can tell you how to do it. How much time do we have left, Barry? We've been going for
as long as you want to do it.
Oh, well. Let's go for snacks.
I have a hard stop in an hour and 10 minutes.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
CPE is the 1-year hospital residency. So after I'd say the biggest shock was meeting the guys on the AIDS ward, where again, I thought everything would be clean and quiet and there'd be someone in a private room with white sheets, and I printed out the 23rd Psalm and I put it in my back pocket for these occasions. And you walk into this chaos, this huge open ward, and this is where people are living. They're not visiting, they're not passing through. The beds are like 5 feet apart. You know nothing, but you walk up to someone and you say, I'm the chaplain, and here comes learning. Mm-hmm. So I liked that enough and was determined enough to get out of Zen Center and get a job
Mhm.
that I got into CPE, very easy to get into, 1 year hospital residency. And there's some, sitting in a windowless room in a basement listening to someone talk. But
Mhm.
there's mostly, this is your ward, you're the chaplain, go do it. And
Was it
this is how
was it hard
you
to
learn.
yeah, was it hard to fund it? Because you were essentially a monastic for over a decade, right? Like how was it? Would you get loans? Like how do you even make that transition?
I was the Tenzo at City Center
Mhm.
for a year. I ran the kitchen. I provided 3 meals a day, 5.5 days a week for 50 people.
Mhm.
My stipend, room and board, plus tuition,
Mhm.
and $400 a month.
Mhm. So you
So,
just saved
yeah,
that up.
I was not saved it up. Are you crazy?
Yeah.
So I had no money at all. The
Mhm.
stipend for the great teacher of the Buddhist chaplaincy training is Gil Fronsdal. Again, a giant who walks among us, a giant of the Dharma, Gil Fronsdal.
Mhm.
And I was so excited about getting accepted to the CPE program. And I see Gil, I got into CPE. And Gil says, can you afford to do it? The stipend was $2,000 a month, and I thought I was rich. But, rent and food. So I just kept squeaking through.
Mhm.
Just, how you just do what you have to do.
Mhm.
And there's the story from that time of I became more Christian than the Christians because I thought that's what the patients expected. I thought they wanted to talk about God.
Mhm.
Not necessarily. They taught me. And the important part of that story is I realized if I was going to be a professional chaplain, which I really wanted to do,
Mhm.
I was going to have to figure out what I meant when I said God. And you don't really need to do that when you're living at Tassajara. so, so I am now able to talk about God
Mhm.
in a way that meets the request from the dying person and maintain my integrity.
Mhm.
And for the last few years, I think I talked about love a lot more than I talked about God
Mhm.
as the most important thing, as where we turn when we need help, as what we can rely on.
The beginning of your chaplaincy experience, was it hard? Because you're having to face a lot of difficult things that most people don't have to deal with. Was that I mean, I imagine that took
And
some,
that's the truth.
yeah.
Oh, it takes so much courage. And there never stopped being the understanding you have to get this right.
Mhm.
There's not a do-over. There's a story in the book, the the CPE students,
Mhm.
those are the ones who are called to the hospital in the middle of the night when there's a crisis,
Mhm.
right? The fat cats who are making real salaries and know what they're doing. They're home asleep.
Mhm.
So I'm called to the ICU. I don't know what to do. They don't even want a chaplain. It was the patient's wife's sister who called for a chaplain, and she disappeared.
Mhm.
She said, "Are you a nun?" I said, "I'm a priest." She said,
Did you have
"Okay,
did you have a
goodbye."
shaved head?
I think I had hair like yours at that point. I was
Mhm.
growing it out.
Mhm.
So I read the 23rd Psalm, and this man was having a really bad death.
Mhm.
The thing about him was he was doing what's called bleeding out. His organs were dissolving.
Mhm.
And he turned his, I'm telling you, he turned his face toward me, and the whites of his eyes were bright red. It was, and you don't scream, you just keep going.
Mhm.
The point to that story is after I read the 23rd Psalm, which neither of them wanted,
Mhm.
I thought, well, you're not just going to go home. So I just sat there.
Mhm.
And in my mind, I started chanting to Kuan Yin. That helps. The sounds, smells, ICU in the middle of the night, nurses passing by. And then I was given a gift that sustained me for the next 12 years, which is what I was doing was reminding everyone that there is a spiritual side to death. This is not just a piece of meat. This is not a material, and there's the spiritual person. The spiritual is here. And that, because you never stop wondering, what am I doing? And you never stop wondering, am I doing it right?
Mm-hmm.
Unless you develop a shtick. And because I'm a Zen student, I never developed a shtick. And you always know, these people really need my help.
Mm-hmm.
What can I, so the first thing is, and the power of the label of chaplain is very powerful, as the label of priest. People have all kinds of reactions.
And often you find yourself in the position of being an advocate for the patients when they're not getting the care that they need. Is that correct?
I hope so.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you see, you go in, you see some really difficult stuff and have to learn what the limits of your power are. Sometimes there's just real suffering and you can't fix it, and you have to witness that and you have to hold it.
Did you work at and I kind of know the answer to this, so I'm kind of cheating, but did you work at a hospital? Did you work at for a private organization? What was your actual work situation?
So the CPE, Clinical Pastoral Education, that's in a hospital.
Mm-hmm.
And then all the work for chaplains is in hospice. So a hospice just means an office with administrative people in it. So I worked in the field and I visited people where they live, and that can be a private home, it can be a nursing home, all different kinds of facilities. So that's where they're receiving hospice care. So I drove up and down, I'd drive 50 miles a day, just, hi, my name's Ren and I'm the chaplain. How are you doing?
What percentage of the time were you warmly welcome versus like, why are you even here, or versus hostile?
For a while I tried to keep a scorecard. How many flat out rejections?
Mm-hmm.
I was interested in the scorecard. How many times did I think I actually had been of help? But the scorecard didn't work. You'd make a call first. My name's Ren and I'm the chaplain, calling to see when I could come by to meet you. And there, if they said, no, honey, we're Catholic, we're fine, then okay. For the first 10 years, if people said, no, we don't think we need a chaplain, then I would push back and I would explain, the care that I offer is spiritual, not religious. I'm not coming to sell anything. I'd say, actually, all hospice workers are useful because we are familiar with the territory where you find yourself, which is probably not territory where you want to be. And then I might say, the chaplain is the person who has time. I have time, and I would be glad to come by and meet you. Stuff like that, selling it.
In your book, it really stood out how often your role was just being blunt. You're dying, you're here because you're sick. Are you afraid? I mean, I was, I guess, moved at how blunt you would be.
See, I think this is where Zen training is really useful. And yes, I would make visits with coworkers, and I'd be surprised. Social workers who'd been working in hospice for years who apparently were unable to say the word death. But yeah, Zen says, but of course, we use our intuition. It's an appropriate response. So I had to learn gradually, I had to feel my way. How much can I say? And I had to connect with the person who I was meeting with to know how far I could go. I had to learn to ask permission. I very much learned to say, just in case. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what this disease is going to do. But just in case you die, And that was pretty good. That was helpful. But yeah,
Can,
definitely the not turning away that Zen teaches us was
mhm.
very, very helpful.
Can I read a little excerpt from your book?
Let's hear it.
Okay, so the context of this is when the assisted suicide law came about, and
Yeah.
right. So this is the context. You're right. The surprise was that people weren't using the law because of physical pain. They were using it because their lives had lost meaning and dignity. They were using it because they were worried about money. They were using it because they'd lost control of their lives. That really struck me because in a lot of ways, that's the heart of Buddhism, you know, is you know, is learning to, get comfortable in that space.
Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about that?
I mean, just that the people would, and this is what we're talking about in California, the End of Life Option Act goes by ELOA. And yes, I'd been a chaplain for some years, and then that law came into effect. And in fact, I was the chaplain who took the ELOA cases, I think because of my Buddhist training. The other chaplains, they didn't want the responsibility.
Mhm.
They didn't want it, and I of course was eager for it. So to hear that someone wants to, yeah, the first case that I write about in the book, he wanted to end his life. His life lacked dignity.
Mhm.
He had lost control, and he wanted he didn't want to spend all the money on his care. He wanted to leave the money for his wife.
Mhm.
To accept that is a legitimate reason to hear it and accept it, to not try to talk people out of, to allow them the dignity
Mhm.
to move forward. That was big. I thought it would all be people with cancer and intractable pain. Not
Mhm.
at all.
Mhm. There's pretty good checks and balances where it's not a quick rash decision too.
For sure.
Yeah.
Although it changed, I think in January when I was active in ELOA, there was a 2-week waiting period. You made your first request, 2 weeks later you made your second request, and then you could get the prescription for the fatal drugs.
Mhm.
Shortened to 2 days, so that could actually, but the checks and balances are there to prevent people doing it to other people.
D- Does Medicare or Medicaid pay for it, or is it something you need to have money for?
Yeah, yeah. I tell the story of that one death that, boy, that just went on for hours and
Oh, right,
hours,
right, yeah.
and that was because she didn't have the money for the fast-acting drugs.
Mhm.
So she got the less expensive drugs, and her death, although she was not suffering, it sure went on for a long time. So that's how it was. You had to pay for your own drugs.
Yeah.
And that
So,
varies. Kaiser did a beautiful job of supporting it completely.
great. So not just assisted suicide, but people in general facing the end. Some people faced it kicking and screaming, terrified, and some people in your book seem to really have a deep equanimity about it. What do you think the source of that difference is? What do you think is their DNA, their outlook? I mean, is there anything that you can take from their
Yeah.
experience?
The saying is that we die the way we live. So back to my experience with my mother,
Mhm.
my wonderful, beautiful, funny, smart, alcoholic mother
Mhm.
who never faced the fact that she too would die
Mhm.
and therefore had a difficult death.
Mhm.
So, with all of this, the question has to be, what does this mean to me? What am I learning about? What is it to be human, right?
Mhm.
That's what Zen practice is about. What is it to be human?
Mhm.
So I saw people, I saw terrible deaths. Saw people who would not die because they were so afraid of it.
Mhm.
And then yes, saw people. long ago, I had the pleasure of hearing Robert Aitken in person, and his wife Anne was dying at that time.
95 or so.
He must have been. And he talked about, he said Anne was going to her death with an air of curiosity. So I would bring this to people. I'd say, what about instead of, I'd say, what we are afraid of is actually change. You are going through the biggest change there is. So to say something like that, I hope I'm helping them to understand, to normalize their experience. And then I'd say, what if, instead of being consumed with fear, the fear of the unknown, I heard about a possibility of going into it with curiosity.
Just taking a stance of inquiry.
To be able to give that teaching from Robert Aitken's wife to old Presbyterians and atheists, and because understand, I wasn't a Buddhist chaplain. Never, I'm here to teach you Buddhism. There are wonderful chaplains who are doing that. Those guys in New York, they are teaching people to meditate at the bedside. That I had to be a chaplain for everybody. So to be able to take this basic life-changing Buddhist teaching and bring it out into the world was a great gift. And people heard it. And in the next visit, they would tell me, I'm sticking with it, like trying to stay curious about what's going on. So I would have people ask me to help their mother to accept Jesus and be saved before she died. There's a tradition of deathbed spiritual awakenings.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's just me, but I never saw it. What I saw was gradual, and again, we die the way we live. There was a woman I became great friends with. I would sort of adopt people. If someone was lonely, I would visit them once a week, maybe more. And this woman and I became great friends. She was in a not very good nursing home in a double room. And when she was dying, her last 1 to 2 days, she kept trying to get out of bed to go to work. I'm like, no, that is not how I want to die. She was consumed with anxiety that she was going to be late for some desk job. I'm just hoping for something better than that, aren't you? And most of what there is to do in those cases is just give people a whole bunch of drugs, calm them down, and it probably is for their own good. But again, Steve, when Steve went to the dentist, he would have a filling done without anesthetic. He said it only hurt for a minute, and he didn't like having his jaw numb for hours after when he did take the Novocaine. So this is a possibility for each of us, that we can go into whatever death is kind of alert and paying attention instead of being snowed by heavy drugs. I don't know. And am I comfortable with death? Am I calm at the fleeting awareness that I too will die? I don't know. And I'm not going to know until it's here. I was diagnosed with lymphoma a few years ago, and that was pretty good because the doctor called, she said it's lymphoma, and I was just leaving for my sitting group. I was just going down the hill for my sitting group. So after hearing lymphoma, I had to meditate. Wouldn't have been my first choice. And at the end of that period of meditation, I was given this gift, these words, this deep understanding. No matter what happens, it will be all right. So I take that as That's my Zen. That's my Zen. I'm in the practice period long distance at Upaya currently, and I heard Roshi Jones say, we stop arguing with life. I love that. Stop arguing with life, because life is just happening. And I'm over here saying, how many people on the first meeting, they would tell me how they wanted their deaths to be. Like, good luck. Your death is going to be the way it is, just as your life is being the way it is, right? So give it up, let life be life, let death be death, and stop arguing with it. And no matter what happens, this is why we practice. No matter what happens, it'll be all right.
So in parallel with your chaplaincy work, you developed a sitting group,
Yeah.
a small sangha in the Bay Area.
Yep.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
It's living room Zen. So I've been talking so long, Barry. It's an hour and a half. I want to make a statement about what are we doing? To the extent that we are mimicking something that was done in Japan 100 years ago. I'm in the Upaya practice period because it's focused on form and ritual. And I'm reminded in the training period, being forced to behave in a certain way, being forced to exercise self-discipline. When do we get a chance to do that in modern America? That way of living while training, and all of us in our black robes and our ocases and our shaved heads, great. Now I'm out in the world and I don't know how pertinent it is. One time I said to Steve, isn't it exciting we're creating American Zen? Steve said, no, actually we're living American Zen. So this is it. And I am at this point in my life, I like living room Zen. So what I offer to my students is what I found the first time I went to sit with Steve. And it's friendly and it's not strict on a group level. I don't mind being strict with individuals privately, but mostly I want to be welcoming. That kind of thing that's possible in a large institution of, we know which foot you're supposed to enter the zendo with, so we are the cool ones. I never want to experience that again, ever. I'm concerned with my being a priest functioning as a separation. Yeah, which is quite possible. So I do living room Zen and we sit facing out and we start in silence. There's bowing. I do a small service. Just, I hope to be what I really hope for. One of my students did the sesshin with Everyday Zen a couple of weeks ago, and that thrills me to the ground because I think for someone like me, I'm not an institutional priest. I would love to be the entry point. I'd love to be the portal. I would love to hook people.
Gateway drug.
Yeah, I'd love to be the gateway drug. And all I really have to teach about is Zazen. Back to trust. What do I trust? I really trust seated meditation. This is the good medicine. Study the Dharma. I trust Shunryu Suzuki Roshi. Very, very happy to read his talks together, his interpretation. I love explaining Suzuki Roshi. We've read other books too. But so I don't see I still have my robes, but they're folded up in a Matsumotoya box at this point. And if I have the chance to do a week-long sesshin somewhere again, they'll come back out. But until then, not to brag, but I would love to be the tea lady by the side of the road.
Everyday Zen, that's largely living room Zen, is that correct? What did you say? I mean, they don't have like a big center or anything.
At the end of one sesshin, Norman gave this little speech. And I think it was not so easy for Norman to be abbot of San Francisco Zen Center. So he gave this little speech about how great it is. There are no buildings to worry about. There are no meetings to go to. But no, it's not. It's not living room Zen. It's more formal than that. It has to be because it's huge, huge. So there's much more. And in the time that I've been a part of it, there's been a real tightening up around the rituals. They used to like do it wrong and just laugh and say it's everyday Zen. Well, I don't know about that. So the question in Zen always comes back to how much is enough? How strict is enough? How loose is enough? And that's a moving target.
Well, do you want to? Oh, go ahead. I was just going to ask you if you wanted to wrap up, but I'll stay here as long as you want.
No, I think so. I think that should be enough. So I said the word target. So do you know the story about Cobancino and the archery contest?
No, I don't.
Okay. So Cobancino goes down to Esalen. He was, of course, an expert Zen archer. And a guy was here from Japan who was an expert Zen archer. And it was going to be a contest. So the guy went first and his arrow hit the target. And the guy says, bullseye. So Cobancino notches his arrow, turns toward the ocean, lets go, and says, bullseye. So may our goal be like that. May our field be as large as all of the oceans on the planet. And may we have that kindness, that permission. Many, many times when someone was dying, family members would ask me, what are we supposed to do? And I finally realized the answer was, create more love. This world is in so much trouble and it needs more love. So here at the bedside of someone who's dying, this is an extreme time. And there must be love here. But you and I, as priests and students of the Dharma, we have the opportunity to make that field this big. I have an old Tassajara pal somehow got some land in the Ozarks, and he has been sitting in a cabin in the Ozarks. It is a Zen center, alone for 10 years. A man who I met at Gampo Abbey is now sitting with him. So my pal from Gampo Abbey called me and he told me about it. And it's the two of them. And they're on the anti-G schedule in a cabin in the Ozarks.
Just two of them.
Now it's the population's increased by 100%. I told my friend, it's possible that the two of you there in that cabin, you might be the glue that is holding the whole universe together. So please continue. And maybe you and me too, Barry, because the universe needs some holding together right now. So thank you for this opportunity. I love to talk, and thank you for giving me a chance to talk about myself and my interesting story. But mostly, thank you for giving me a chance to express my deep gratitude to having met the Dharma and having been overwhelmed by the Dharma. This is the medicine I have always needed.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Barry.